Uh, so I'll call the meeting to order. This is let's see, November 9th. And this is an urgent NCAC membership meeting to deal with the topic that
One or the other of us should turn on our sound.
is there some sound issues? Can everyone hear me?
We hear you, Mark.
Okay, we'll get going then. So this is a urgent meeting, and we call these when there's a time-sensitive issue, and this is definitely one of those. So the agenda today is really just one item, and it is dealing with the FEMA issue, which before the county actually, and to be honest, before the state, the FEMA issue on having to comply with new FEMA regulations by a very short time period of December 1st. And it has to do with endangered species and floodplains. And that's what's before us today. We put some documents up on the website for folks to take a look at prior to the meeting. And some of them, we've got a frequently asked questions document. We've got a letter from the governor to FEMA, and then we have a document from Oregon. It's Oregon Property Owners Association. And those three documents, I think, are linked to this meeting. And what we're hoping to do today is to have a conversation with the membership as much as we need to about this issue in terms of sort of education wise. And then what we'd like to do is take a vote today on, we have a draft letter that we have, the executive board for the NCAC has drafted that we'd like to send to the county. There is going to be a meeting on November 14th, and it's a joint meeting of the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning Commission. And we would like Neskowin, the CAC of Neskowin, to make a statement regarding this FEMA, impending FEMA decision at that meeting. And so we've drafted a letter that we will share with the membership today that has to do with maybe a statement that we'd like to put forward at that meeting. And then there's going to be another meeting on November 27th, a Wednesday. And we want to talk a little bit about what the membership might like to do at that meeting, at that meeting. So, so I'll stop for a minute, and I don't know if we want to, certainly we have folks here that are very, Nancy Vandell has done a wonderful job of working with Tom Sipe and Tom Hrodich and drafting a draft letter for that November 14th meeting that we're going to share. We have Tom is here, Nancy's here, and I don't know. I think I might just open it up to questions for a bit here before we go on to talking about the letter. And do folks have questions here? I see Tom, your hand's up, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to propose that I know Sarah's here and I hate to impose on her.
Yeah.
But we had a discussion on October the 16th, a special meeting to talk about this, where Sarah laboriously went through all of the issues and options available to the county and to us. And I know that she's been working on that and since then. And the feeling, well, not the feeling, I think the indication at the October 16th meeting was that of all the choices that are available to us, under the circumstances, there should probably be a temporary moratorium. I don't know if that's any longer true. And if there's a difference of opinion about that among the powers that be, but if Sarah could just fill us in a little bit about what she's learned in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And again, Sarah, the hardest working government servant in the world. If you don't mind doing that, it would be appreciated.
And if I could make a quick comment or before Sarah weighs in, I just want to make sure we've got a quorum certified, which is wonderful to see. And I think we still need to make
The conflict.
the officers still need to do the conflicts.
Yep.
But I think when Sarah talks, I think there may be some people here who don't really understand, haven't had a chance to read why we're so concerned, and make sure, Sarah, I'm sure you will, but go through what this means to homeowners and residents in Neskowin about this FEMA issue. So thank you. And also the most recent draft letter is in the meeting folder on the events page if you want to take a look at what we're going to be hoping to vote on later on in the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. If we could just pause for just a moment, I flew right by the conflict of interest statement that we need to address. So I have no conflicts today.
Michael Beachley, I have no conflicts today.
No conflicts, Gary Billingsley.
No conflicts, Alex Clark.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you. Okay, Sarah, you want to?
Sure. Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's nice to see you all. Thank you, Tom, for the warm introduction. And I also just want to say how appreciative I am to work with such a thoughtful and articulate and talented community as Neskowin. And thank you, Mark, for convening this meeting today. So, Nancy, I can give a little bit of a background, and then Tom, I'll talk a little bit about the moratorium matter as well. So for those of us that maybe this is your first time joining us, or you haven't been able to attend a meeting where we've talked about this in the recent future, there was a lawsuit in 2009. FEMA was sued in the state of Oregon. This followed a lawsuit that occurred where FEMA was also sued in Washington. And the basis of the lawsuit was that because FEMA has allowed development in areas of MAP special flood hazard in Oregon, that has resulted in a take of Endangered Species Act listed species in Oregon, specifically coho salmon and orca whale. FEMA settled in that lawsuit, and the judge ordered that FEMA consult with National Marine Fisheries, and that National Marine Fisheries write a biological opinion for the state of Oregon that focused on recovery of these ESA listed species. That was completed in 2016. And when that was completed, essentially what that biological opinion did was it took the stance that any development in mapped areas of special flood hazard would result in a take of these ESA listed species. So development as defined by FEMA is any human caused change to improved or unimproved real estate. So it's not just construction. It's any human caused change. So the biological opinion took the stance that any human caused change in these mapped areas of special flood hazard would result in a take of Endangered Species Act listed species. Yes, wow, that's right. So, and to be clear, for those that are also joining us that are new to this, what we are visiting about today does not apply to properties outside of FEMA mapped areas of special flood hazard. What we are talking about only applies to those mapped areas as they are mapped on FEMA's flood insurance rate maps. Now, for Neskowin, that's a significant part of your community. So I want to just also acknowledge that, that Neskowin is a community that we are greatly concerned about the impacts of these changes. Because of the stance the biological opinion took, it also included 6 reasonable and prudent alternatives that FEMA must take to avoid take of ESA listed species and to start bringing back fish populations, increasing water quality, and also enhancement of riparian corridors. And those 6 reasonable and prudent alternatives basically established a series of no net loss standards moving forward. The county was part of and is part today of a group called Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. We sued FEMA in 2018 to try to stop implementation of this biological opinion on the grounds of harm and what this could do to several communities and counties statewide. This impacts over 230 cities and communities in the state of Oregon and 31 counties. And those numbers continue to increase as we look at direct and indirect impacts. But if you look at the flood insurance rate maps, 31 counties, over 230 cities. We were not able to prove harm because FEMA had not required us to change anything. They had not taken action. So the 2018 lawsuit was dismissed. But rolling forward, the implementation, so now FEMA is in a federal environmental review process to implement this biological opinion in Oregon. We are anticipating somewhere early 2027 for that to occur. But what has happened and what has put us in this conversation today is that last year, a second lawsuit was filed against FEMA in Oregon. And it was filed by the Northwest Environmental Defense Center and the Center for Biological Diversity. And the reason for that lawsuit was that FEMA had not yet implemented the biological opinion in Oregon. So the lawsuit said, FEMA, you should have already had this done. It's not done yet. And so they sued. So a different group sued FEMA last year. Where we are at today with this December 1st deadline and this requirement to implement these pre-implementation measures for compliance with FEMA is because of this lawsuit that is open and pending right now. FEMA's trying to settle this lawsuit, and their way to settle it is to require all of these communities and counties in Oregon that have these mapped areas of special flood hazard to change our development code regulations now for these mapped areas to start working on compliance towards that 2016 biological opinion. And so in that letter, all of us across the state that have these mapped areas, we all received a letter on July 15th from FEMA. And that letter said to ensure your continued participation in the National Flood Insurance Program and to remain in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. By December 1st, you have one of 3 options to pick to change your development codes and how you permit in these mapped areas of special flood hazard. One is a model ordinance with new regulations that meet those no net loss standards for floodplain function, compensatory flood storage, fish access. So it's taking all of these new environmental regulatory codes and marrying them and integrating them into the flood risk mitigation standards that already exist. So it will become a multi-pronged permitting process for both flood risk reduction and compliance with the Endangered Species Act at a local level. Second option is what's called a habitat assessment to be required with every floodplain development permit. Basically, it is an analysis performed by a qualified professional, which we're thinking is most likely a biologist, to look at someone's proposal for development, as FEMA defines it, and confirm that there is no take of ESA listed species with the development proposal. The third option is a moratorium. to where no development would be allowed in these mapped areas of special flood hazard until 2027, when the final implementation, the final code framework for development regulations is done. So the Tillamook County Board of Commissioners, commissioners across the state, and city councils are all now in the same position to pick one of these three options by December 1st. To your question, Tom, and if you read the FAQ sheet that DLCD issued, one of the fundamental problems and challenges all cities and counties faced with this are having is that because of the structure of Oregon's land use system and our land use laws, local jurisdictions cannot just arbitrarily change permitting requirements. We have Measure 56 notice requirements. We have Measure 49. We have property takings laws and other measures within our state regulatory framework that protects property rights or requires compensation when property values and existing development rights may change as a result of a regulation change. We do not have the time frame to follow the noticing requirements to landowners impacted by these changes by December 1st. The hearings themselves will go well into spring for any jurisdiction who's looking at the model ordinance or the habitat assessment. FEMA has continued to modify and amend these documents. I found out last week, both are in process of continuing to be amended. So through this, for counties and cities, it's also been challenging to figure out what to do because of the continued evolution of these documents and regulations. Because we cannot also just arbitrarily update our regulations, what counties and cities have been forced into are temporary moratoriums. And those moratoriums remaining in place until that required land use hearing proceedings and those laws for changing your codes have been followed and codes have been updated in the form that they're supposed to be. DLCD in their FAQ guide has also determined that even even pursuing a moratorium is subject to that Measure 56 notification requirement under state law. So none of it's easy. In terms of our ability to have an opportunity to develop a plan thoughtfully and carefully that adheres to state land use requirements is virtually impossible for all cities and counties. With the threat on the other side from FEMA about not being in compliance with the NFIP or the Endangered Species Act. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions, and then I can jump into part 2 of this because I don't want to leave this with all doom and gloom. So, Tom, did that answer your question?
Well, I've got more, of course.
Of course.
Don't you, well, I've got 2 questions. Here's the first one. Don't you have ballot measure 56? Isn't ballot measure 56 notice in play in all 3 alternatives?
It should be, yes, but because we haven't been able to make a decision, no Measure 56 notice
Right.
has gone out.
But if you make it, if you made a decision and you informed FEMA of that by December the 1st, at least you would be acting in good faith and moving, toward a resolution, right? The second question I had was that in reading the materials and most importantly, the frequently asked questions, when you had addressed us in October, I think most of us got the understanding that anyone that was in a floodplain who wanted to do any kind of development, decks, riprap, and there are many different things that you can think of because it's any change to improve property or I guess unimproved or property, right? But I noticed in reading on page 6, the frequently asked questions that, and I haven't had a chance to look into this further, but there are some activities that are exempted that seem to cover a lot of what people might be doing, like normal maintenance of structures, street repairs, habitat restoration activities, routine agricultural practices, normal maintenance of above ground utilities. Is that something you all have explored in the last few weeks as to what that means?
Thank you, Tom. That's a great question. So in terms of routine maintenance, what that means is not expanding your building footprint. It also means not expanding impervious surfaces. A floodplain development permit is still ultimately required, but the no net loss standards would be exempt. However, when you're talking about maintenance of a home, if the maintenance value exceeds 50% of the real market value of the structure, or the maintenance that is occurring pushes you over time, let's say you've been maintaining your home, making upgrades, etc. When you hit that 50% substantial improvement threshold that FEMA has, then you have to meet current requirements, which would kick you back into the no net loss standard. So part of what myself and others across the state are concerned about is when it talks about routine maintenance, those substantial improvement thresholds still apply. And routine maintenance means you don't change the area of impact or footprint, which can be very misleading when it comes to driveways or other types of human-caused changes to a property. In terms of things like infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, sewer, the prism cannot change. The area of impervious surface cannot change. And that's not only width, it's depth. So even to pave a road, you would have to grind down and then only replace to that extent of what existed before. Prisms change all of the time because especially of the rain and the amount of rainfall we have. Drainage is a big deal. So that's something we're trying to figure out as well, as if the prism has to change, or if Public Works wanted to widen the shoulder of a road the next time they pave in these areas, that could kick them into these no net loss standards. Riprap is a huge concern I have, especially for Neskowin. I don't know how you maintain a riprap revetment where you are not altering the prism or the toe of the riprap revetment, just simply due to the size of the rocks. And the rocks are always different. They could potentially alter the footprint of the toe of the slope or the prism. And what is also not considered to be maintenance is if you are making these improvements and you're having to make these maintenance, you're having to conduct this maintenance because it was flooding that caused them.
So I have
Yeah. So, and then just one more quick thing. Underground infrastructure, FEMA has started talking about, well, if you're replacing your water or sewer lines, they're underground, they're in the same spot, that can be considered to be exempt. But new pump stations, sand filters, those are things that are not exempt and are not considered to be maintenance. So there's things that in terms of those maintenance and exempt activities, we are still trying to pin down on FEMA what they mean. And even for agriculture, when they see routine agricultural practices are exempt, but they say grading and filling are not. Farmers need to maintain their roads in their fields for their tractors. There's a lot of crop cultivation that walks that line of grading activities, especially when you're filling in areas. So it's not as straightforward as it appears to be on paper.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm gonna just say Wyatt has had a question in the chat for some time, and I know Michael Boyle has had his hand up. I just wonder if you could please just talk about what the penalties are if we can't get some kind of concurrence from FEMA, how that could affect landowners in terms of the actual penalty and flood insurance.
Sure. So what FEMA has said with full implementation of this 2016 BiOp and with what we are experiencing now with their efforts to settle this current lawsuit with the Pickums, is that if we do not comply, suspension of flood insurance policies within a community. So in that case, if Tillamook County does not do what they want, it means, that now they're saying eventually they want to work with us. That's not what they want to do, because we're asking, what if we don't comply? What if we can't comply? Are you really going to suspend everyone's flood insurance policies? And they have said since day one, that's a consequence. They've softened that, Nancy, to where now they're saying, well, we want to work with you first. We don't want to do that, etc. The other thing that they've said is that if we do not comply, we would not have access to federal disaster funding relief. There are many attorneys across the state and part of Oregonians for Floodplain Protection and our state and congressional delegates that are really questioning if we had some sort of a natural disaster, disastrous event here on the Oregon coast, would they really withhold disaster federal funding relief for Tillamook County not complying with the Pickums? I mean, we have to take those warnings seriously. But the other side of that is that there's a lot of legal analysis, I will say, in terms of what they can actually do in those actions. Being one that has asked that question repeatedly, what they have also recently said is that Oregon, FEMA has an incidental take permit in Oregon, which is in relation to the Endangered Species Act and an Endangered Species Act listed species. And if we do what they tell us to do, we fall under their federal incidental take permit for development activities in the state of Oregon. If we don't do what they ask us to do, then essentially Tillamook County would be required to go get their own incidental take permit from National Marine Fisheries, which is several years and a lot of money. So basically, we would be in violation of federal law and the Endangered Species Act if we don't do what they say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to go to Wyatt and then Michael Boyle, and then Guy's got a question. So Wyatt and Linda Angelo's question is, has the state or the counties considered intervening in the lawsuit?
That's a great question. So yes, I wear two hats. One of my hats is as the community development director and the floodplain administrator for Tillamook County. The other hat that I wear is I'm a board member of what's called Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. And this is a coalition of public-private partnerships. So Clatsop County, City of Warrenton, Coos County, the Creamery, Oregon Home Builders Association, Oregon Realtors Association, and others. We created this coalition after the 2016 biological opinion was published, and that coalition is what sued FEMA in 2018. We filed an amicus brief on this current pending litigation, and actually spoke at the National Association of Realtors conference this morning. They're meeting in Boston, and we asked them for funding because we are preparing to file litigation on the 2016 BiOp coming weeks. So the current pending lawsuit where these pickums and December 1st date are coming from, the coalition has already filed the amicus brief. I don't think we're going to see a decision on any of that until towards the end of December, which does not help us, any of us. And then long term, it's that 2016 BiOp that really needs to be challenged, because we're going to be back here in 2 years if we don't get back to the source of the path, not the goals of the BiOp, but the path.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Oh, and Mark, if I could add
Sure.
one more thing, I
Sure,
did also
sure.
receive confirmation today. As many of you know, we were all hoping that Governor Kotek's letter to FEMA asking to suspend or delay the December 1st implementation date, FEMA has let the governor know that is not an option. So there will be no delay.
Okay, thank you. Michael Boyle, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Couple of things there for you. And obviously there's probably no answer to the first one, just a crystal ball. Looking at the events of last Tuesday, has there been any thought given to the impacts on the Environmental Species Act? Because I think it's a well-known fact, it was not an item that was well loved by the now incoming administration. So I mean, obviously I think it's definitely too early to tell, but just what kind of impacts that could have on all of this. And then the second was more just an observation. Was I know one of the things that's been mentioned a couple of times of not complying can impact Tillamook County's ability for disaster relief fund. And I really question that, because disaster reimbursement is done under the Stafford Act. And under the Stafford Act, the federal government distributes money to the state, and then the state distributes it to these county and local areas. So that seems like that could be a little bit of saber rattling on FEMA's part, but I doubt that it would hold up in court, because that's not how the Stafford Act and money under the Stafford Act is distributed and dispersed. So just a couple things. Thank you.
Yes. So Michael, to your second point, our legal team agrees with you. And looking at that through the Stafford Act, although there are some exceptions within the Stafford Act that could give FEMA the authority to withhold that disaster funding relief. So you're tracking exactly where we are, and that is something that we are carefully looking at and evaluating. In terms of your first set of comments, there is with the fourth option of doing nothing, that because part of it is the question of whether or not FEMA has the authority to actually do what they're doing, especially with the fact that the federal environmental review process, which is required to assess social, economic, and environmental impacts before any of this can be implemented, hasn't even been done. It has not been finished. And so the question becomes, for the county and other jurisdictions, should we be considering an alternative approach that meets the intent of ensuring, or getting some sort of confirmation that before we issue a permit, that it will not result in the take of ESA listed species. So that is a fourth option that is currently being carefully evaluated by a team of attorneys.
Okay, great. Thank you. And yeah, I really do, not to go back to Stafford Act. Being in the urban search and rescue side, deal with the Stafford Act a lot.
Yep.
And then there's all kinds of complications, or actually things that can go along that support it. You can have the president declare, no cost share with 100% reimbursement. And again, that's going to be controlled by the state and not by FEMA. And it's not going to dive down to local counties and local areas. So yeah, but thank you.
I actually flew to Colorado and met with FEMA administration for one day at a conference 2 weeks ago. And to your point about the election, yes, that is all. There is a lot of quiet conversation in the background about all of that. So you are on point there too.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens after the first of the year.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, the music has started to play.
Yeah.
So, all
You.
right, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, next question is for Sarah, for you, is from Guy Sievert. I'll read it here. What impact does this opinion have on our riparian areas in Neskowin, especially Neskowin, Hawk, and Butte Creek?
Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you, Guy. And Guy, one of the other things that's been on my mind, what FEMA is telling us is through these pre-implementation measures with the pickums and that 170-foot riparian setback, which is what we are looking at, it is highly unlikely restoration projects will be able to occur within these areas during this pre-implementation period. So I will be speaking more to that on the 14th in the evening at that meeting. But I think it's really important for our restoration communities to know that under these pre-implementation measures, because of that 170-foot setback, it is highly likely that even restoration activities cannot be permitted within those areas at this time. So I am trying to flush that out, and we'll have some better answers on that later this week. So one of the things that's very concerning right now is that with these Pick'em code updates, there is a requirement for 170-foot setback from creeks, streams, rivers, bodies of water that are within these mapped areas of special flood hazard. Now, if the flood hazard map area ends before the 170 feet, that 170 feet ends as well. Because remember, these requirements and regulation updates are for these areas of map special flood hazard. So anything that extends beyond it cannot, nothing, these new regulations will not extend beyond that area of special flood hazard. But what it means for these 4 areas that are within 170 feet of these creeks or the ocean, right? And that are within that 170 feet and within that area of special flood hazard is that you're looking at very severe mitigation ratios that I don't know can be met. FEMA is saying, oh, the math is easy. The math is easy. And they are right. The mitigation ratio math is easy. If you can do basic math and basic, pre-algebra, you can do the math on paper. The problem is on the ground. It's when you add that element of reality and site conditions where the math all of a sudden doesn't work, because in most areas you won't be able to achieve those mitigation ratios. What I am most concerned about, and I'll use Hawk Creek as the example, is if there's scouring or erosion, someone wants to come in and do some shoreline stabilization for that river or creek, the creek bank. Under these rules, I don't know how we permit it. That's the concern.
The 170 feet is somewhat confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it 170 feet for properties that are outside the floodplain, but within 170 feet of the floodplain? Or is it 170 feet from a stream or creek?
So thank you, Tom. So I'm going to start by saying these regulations only apply to areas that are within those mapped FEMA areas of special flood hazard. So if you have property and a creek in that mapped area, that 170-foot setback applies within that mapped area for the duration of the map area, or 170 feet if the boundary of the floodplain goes out farther than 170 feet. So if you have a property that's abutting the creek, property's 50 feet deep. We'll use Proposal Rock subdivision. It's a great example. You have a bunch of 50 by 100-foot lots in there. You have the creek. Most of Proposal Rock is mapped in areas of special flood hazard. That 170-foot setback will extend from the creek as far as that mapped area of special flood hazard boundary also lies. So it has to be both. It's 170 feet and you're in the mapped area.
Okay.
Yep. If the flood boundary ends 50 feet from the creek, that 170-foot setback then also ends 50 feet from the creek, because it's everything is ultimately controlled by that flood boundary line.
Thanks.
Does that help?
Yes.
It's hard to explain without one of my terrible drawings.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I mean, you're doing a wonderful job answering these questions, which I think everybody's just trying to really zero in on what all of this means. And so you're very knowledgeable on this topic. So thank you very much for being here today.
Happy to be here, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, other questions? I'm looking here in the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Mark,
Yes.
I have one
Go
question.
ahead, Guy. Go ahead.
Sarah, I noticed in the language that FEMA uses, they talk about floodplain functions,
Yes.
water storage,
Mhm.
water quality, vegetation, and even in some cases, they don't mention fish ESA at all. They
Right.
just talk about the three other functions. What do you read into that, if any?
So yeah, so the fish function, the fish egress is embedded in there. They have not separated the two. So they're saying ESA compliance is achieved by no net loss of those three functions. But with that, the fish egress requirement is embedded in that. And so what that means for folks that are joining us today that may not understand that, it means that in a flood event, as that water expands across property, right? So this is all in those mapped areas of special flood hazard outside of creek banks, river banks, etc. The idea is that the fish must be able to have safe passage and move freely during a flood event to ensure they can find refuge, food, etc., with safe passage also back into that body of water as those floodwaters start receding. And so things like conventional foundations in these areas no longer essentially work because you are putting obstructions in the path of fish egress during a flood event. So things like piling and pier construction, right? One of the things we're trying to do is figure out those alternative methods in our efforts to negotiate with FEMA and alternative standards, or figure out how to best help landowners achieve those mitigation ratios with minimal impact to the floodplain.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Nick, you okay, Guy?
Yeah.
Am I okay?
I know. Quite an answer. I know. We've talked about that before with the filing and
Yeah.
okay. I have a question, Sarah, from Peter Birch.
Yes.
Let me read this question. If a big storm damages a riprap seawall and we cannot get a permit to repair it, and that leads to property damage in the town, what recourse do we have?
That's a great question. That is exactly at the heart of my concerns for communities like Neskowin, Rockaway Beach. My advice to you is to call state legislators and your congressional delegates. I think one of the things that the county is going to have to take a hard look at is in scenarios like that, road washouts culvert washouts. You know, when you start talking about property damage and public safety, we're going to have to make a decision on whether or not to allow development to occur and analyze the risk and the consequence of that. But I think those types of concerns are things that our legislators and congressional delegates need to know, because they're not hearing from enough people real on the ground concerns and impacts that this may have.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mhm.
And Mr. Rask has asked can we add the link to the FEMA flood map here? And I think Nancy's done that.
Mhm.
It's there, so.
And it's super easy. You can punch in your home address in Neskowin or anywhere in the United States, quite frankly. If you own other properties in Oregon and you're worried about this, you know, your family's properties, take a look. You can put in Neskowin, Oregon, and zoom in and find your property. So it's a great tool. And what you're looking for are areas that are shaded like a blue-green-ish. In Neskowin, those are the areas. If it's brown, you don't have to worry about it. If there's no shade, you don't have to worry about it. It's that blue-green area. And then elsewhere, it's the red hatched area if there's a river for floodway. It's those two shades that you got to watch for on the maps.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Nancy's got your hand up, Nancy.
Yeah, just a quick question. Did you say in your talk earlier, Sarah, too, that on the 16th, that even if you have a property that's not in the floodplain, some of the definitions of the floodplains are changing with FEMA? And then secondly, that you might still be affected about with infrastructure kinds of things that might be going through your property, or there could be some other impacts even if you're not actually in the floodplain designation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nancy. So I'm going to start with your second one, and then I'd love for you to repeat your first question or comment. I'll use Neskowin, Manzanita, Nehalem as the example. So I think we're all familiar with like Manzanita, Neskowin area to some degree. So these are areas that have no or very minimal mapped areas of special flood hazard. So the properties within these communities are largely unaffected. However, their entire sewer district treatment plant, is in one of those mapped areas of special flood hazard. So while they are not directly impacted, any upgrades or improvements to that sewer plant may or may not be able to happen because of these regulations. City of Tillamook, their wastewater treatment plant is in an area of special flood hazard. It will impact, they have a lot of system upgrades and things that they want to do that we are trying to figure out how they can get them done. And that will impact the entire city, even properties that are not within those mapped areas of special flood hazard. So the long-term impacts of this are unknown. And then Nancy, what was the first part?
The first part was, and I may have misunderstood, but I thought you had said something about some of the flood map designations might be changing
Yes.
through FEMA, that they're not exactly something to count on at the moment. So I may have, and I also, while I've got the floor, I just want to thank you for everything you're doing on behalf of all of us, and the impossible job you're dealing with. It's absolutely insane. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. So with that 2016 biological opinion, so I mentioned a little bit earlier that there were 6 reasonable and prudent alternatives. So 6 courses of action that National Marine Fisheries has determined must be done
when I was in there
to achieve these no net loss standards. One of those 6 is to change the mapping methodology that FEMA uses to determine these areas of special flood hazard. And so what that means is the methodology will be changing with new maps coming at some point in time. It could be 2 years from now, it could be 10 years from now, no idea. But basically to take into account things like climate change, sea level rise, and other factors that National Marine Fisheries has been absent from their current mapping standards. So yes, Nancy, we will be seeing something different in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I've got a question from Tom, but Michael Beachley has his hand up. So Michael.
Oh, thank you, Mark. And hi, Sarah. It's nice to see you again. You really are doing a great job. This is detail that we do need. A number of the comments lead me to ask this question. It may seem pretty small and picayunish, but I think it needs to be asked anyway. There are situations in our property where the neighbors have caused damage to property in between. They've burned our fences, for example, and other damages. If any damage occurs that causes damage to the house and so on, how does that relate to what we're talking about?
So FEMA has said that, if your house burns down or if your property is damaged, you do have the ability to replace within the exact same footprint. There are still elements like elevating the structure to reduce flood risk, etc., that are still required. The no net loss standards would not come into play, provided that you are not increasing the area of impact or disturbance. And just to reiterate, that includes any impervious surface or grading. So if you have had some damage, Michael, especially a fence or something, I would encourage you to get that either repaired in short order, or the other thing is I am permitting a lot of work right now and asking people to get applications in our office before a regulation change, because under Oregon's land use system, the regulations that are in effect are those that were in effect the day you applied.
So
you
time is of the essence then.
That is
a
correct.
factor. Okay, I appreciate that.
Yep.
That's important.
Yeah. I am permitting a water line project that goes between Tillamook County and the city of Bay City. There are things traditionally we have not required floodplain development permits for, trying to, given FEMA's definition of development, trying to be logical and practical about how we permit development in floodplains. I have not traditionally permitted fences or even, a water line, but given this situation and these circumstances, I am trying to permit just about everything so that people have the next 2 years to do that work within the permit approval that I can give them. But because December 1st, Michael, also falls on a Sunday, I need an application the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Because that's the other thing, is that this is getting very tricky with timing. Anybody who thinks they want to submit an application for development, you can call our office at 503-842-3408. That's our main line. And you're going to set up an appointment. You're going to talk to a lady named Deborah, or leave her a message, please. She'll call you back. But Melissa and I are both taking appointments to get people to help them get applications in, even if they're incomplete, by that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so that we can try to permit as much work as possible. These are not appointments for, got this vacant piece of property, like to know what I can do with it. Unfortunately, with these timelines, we are past that. But if this is, Michael, I want to repair my fence, I want to build a new fence, we would love to see you and help you get that permit in the queue before December 1st.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Sarah. So a couple of questions in the chat here. One is from Tom Prohodich.
Hey, Mark,
Go ahead.
as is often the case when I try to make a question in the chat, I hit send before I finished.
Okay.
I wanted to, but this may be important to some people. Last time, I think you told us, and I just want to know if it's still true, that if a number of properties that are in Neskowin that are in the special floodplain hazard area are partially in and partially out.
Mhm.
If they're partially in from FEMA's interpretation is that they're in, right?
So properties and buildings are two different things. If your property is vacant and that line bisects your property, it only applies to the area that's mapped. However, Tom, if your structure is partially in or partially out, FEMA views the whole structure as being in.
Okay,
yeah.
that's a good clarification.
The Dory restaurant in Cloverdale, right? We've all driven through Cloverdale. There's that older restaurant, been there for forever. Sometimes, it's had a new owner here or there. Literally the corner, only one corner of that building is in. The rest of it is out. But FEMA says the whole building is in because the one little corner is in. So yeah. So if your house is partially in, partially out, or even if it's just the corner of your house that touches that boundary, your whole house is in.
This isn't really that complicated, is it? I mean, it really is complicated, is what I mean.
Yeah.
There's so many questions that come up about this. So yeah, I can't, Sarah.
It's what's really fun or not is FEMA's been doing these sessions that started with planners in October, information sessions. And we have all come at them pretty hard with several questions that they have not been able to answer.
Right.
Mhm.
I've got a comment here that I'll just read. Maybe it's a question, but Missy Moss has asked or made a statement. Is anyone concerned about property values question, which is a question, and how about our business impacts as well? So that's, I think those are good points that she's made there.
Yeah, I was in Pacific City this morning at their CAC meeting with Commissioner Olson, and that came up. I mean, and it's not just us, it's cities and counties across the state. We're looking at property takings. There's going to be lawsuits, property tax appeals. And ultimately, all of that will have a ripple effect on water and sewer districts, school districts, and others.
Question, Sarah, and this is from Brent Olson. Neskowin North has a height limitation of 18 feet above the crown of the road. If a home burns and the flood risk indicates the property must be elevated 11 feet, what options are available to rebuild?
So I think that's a really good question. That's not unique to just Neskowin North. There's several subdivisions or areas that are regulated also by CC&Rs that have that same concern. From the county's standpoint, the CC&Rs are civil, right? So in your Neskowin zones, your building heights are currently at 24 and 35 feet. So that is what, with those elevation requirements, the county would look at. I would suggest, especially for Neskowin North and others, you might want to have a conversation with your board to see about amending your CC&Rs for extenuating circumstances or something in that along those lines.
Thank you. Barbara Gordon has just a clarification. I think she says, just to verify, this moratorium and permits for work only applies to properties in the mapped floodplain zones.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
And I have in my conversations with the board, I did a board briefing update a couple of weeks ago. I am not recommending moratoriums. I think if there's a way we can avoid that, I don't know what that looks like. Again, that's part of our legal team, but I am so worried, especially walking into winter, if a moratorium in these areas is proposed And that's a big deal for homeowners with storms and floods, public works and others. So it's a very serious situation.
Okay, Mr. Rask has a comment. I can look up my address. I think he's referring to the flood
Mhm.
map, but I cannot determine from the map where the floodplain exists. It looks like a regular Google map with no markings.
Then that's good. So if it just looks like a regular Google map and there's no shade, that's excellent. It's the blue-green shade you got to worry about, or the red stripe shade. Sometimes it does take a bit for that FEMA map to load. So I would also be patient with it and see what happens. It's not always ideal. You can email me, Mr. Rask, and I'm happy to verify that when I get back into the office and let you know.
Thanks, Sarah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. It's
Okay.
doesn't seem to show anything other than the property.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
got things down below it, but
Mm.
Yeah, so
Yeah, if you guys all want to email me, just put FEMA BiOp something in the subject line if you send me an email. So I know what to be on the lookout for, and so that I don't miss you.
okay, thanks, Sarah. Lori Kovac has a quick same comment
Mhm.
about it not working correctly. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Okay, somebody, Jeff Lindman says FEMA says they're having a problem getting that layer to show right now. So, okay, thanks, Jeff.
And Mark, I will be pitching that fourth option that our team of attorneys have been evaluating to the Board of Commissioners. On the 14th, we've had several communities and industry representatives ask us to look at a fourth option. I don't have it completely done, but it is something, again, I mean, just because I know people are so concerned and people are scared, and they should be, I agree. But I would just say, leaving this meeting today, we do have the amicus brief. There is a litigation plan underway. And then the 14th will be an opportunity to really dive into various options that the board could consider. And your feedback on those is very much appreciated. We're not done figuring this out. It's going to take years. I think we're just getting started. The goals of the biological opinion for fish recovery, water quality, and healthy riparian corridors, those are things that we all want. There's no question about that. The question is there a better way to achieve those goals without upending our communities and property rights through this path? So we are working on those things, and we're not going to probably see anything for a while. But for those of you that are really worried, just know there are people looking into this, and there will be action.
would this be a good time to look at the letter then? And while Sarah's here to see if we need to, how it sounds and whether we need to add anything.
Yeah,
Can I ask Sarah a question?
yeah, go ahead, Tom.
What,
Yeah.
the letter that's being
Yeah.
proposed that
Yeah.
we're getting ready to look at, which essentially mimics Governor Kotek's letter and other letters asking for delay on the timeline. Does that make any sense now, given the fact that you heard this morning that the governor, who arguably is more important than the NCAC, has been advised that FEMA's not going to delay the timelines?
Yeah, I mean, I think what would be helpful to everyone, the governor, the legislature, and to Congress, is perhaps expressing disappointment or concern over the fact that FEMA has not been willing to, accommodate the governor's request. Because the other part of that, in addition, Tom, to pushing back or getting rid of that date, was the part about working with Oregon Solutions and others to come up with a better approach. And I was involved in that on the back end, actually, as part of her letter and have been meeting with the executive director of Oregon Solutions and others. I think it would be great to include support of those efforts, should the community agree, in your letter, and to support the governor in that. So I'll make sure she gets a copy of this letter as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see. I'll just read, there's 3 comments in the chat and then we'll maybe move on. So Mimi Witala said, but whether we are in or out, we should all be concerned the map can change at any time.
Mhm.
Comment. Carol Hoke, Neskowin Beach Golf Club is in danger. Comment. And John Bennett, it says page 7 of the FAQ appears to suggest that communities cannot respond by December 1st and tell FEMA that they are working on it.
Mhm.
That's not an option, I think is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, FEMA has gone back to say, well, we understand you have to comply with land use law, but for our purposes, you could just walk into the habitat assessment permit by permit. There's been frustratingly, there has been a massive disconnect and FEMA really not acknowledging the position that they're putting residents and jurisdictions in by having to comply with land use regulations as well. But it's just kind of, well, for our purposes, you can do this. You can do that permit by permit, but to that comment, we can't. There isn't a we're working on it approach.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I guess one more comment. Peter Birch, could the county issue a permit to repair a revetment seawall that states that the same materials must be used and that there is no change to the footprint? And that would satisfy FEMA issues.
Well, so here's where, real quickly, where that gets interesting. Again, thinking about Neskowin in these conversations, most of your permits are done by the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department because you are seaward of that statutory vegetation line. So part of our challenge as local jurisdictions with Oregon Parks and Recreation is how are these permits going to move forward and who's going to ensure compliance? So in terms of that question, I would say to reach out to Oregon Parks and Recreation. If it's something where I can do a land use compatibility statement and just do some sort of floodplain development permitting before December 1st, even though there might be a jurisdictional authority question, I am happy to help people do that if that's what I can do. Just remember there's 2 sides to that permitting process, and the other one is Oregon Parks, and I can't speak for them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
If I could I just want to summarize a couple of things. So there's the meeting on November 14th at 7 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the joint planning and Board of County Commissioners meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And where's that located? It's
it's going to be at the Port of Tillamook Bay Conference Center in their main conference room. So their office is at 4000 Blimp Boulevard. That conference center where we're meeting is in that main office complex. Is where we have planning commission meetings. Those of you that attended short-term rental advisory committee meetings, that's my favorite meeting room there. So we will be there. And then the link for that meeting is also already posted on the community development homepage. So if you want to stay home, because it doesn't start until 7, if you want to stay home and just watch, then you are certainly welcome to do that from the comfort of your home.
And can I ask Sarah, the focus of that meeting is going to be on a discussion about the options. Is that
Correct?
Okay.
Yep. So I will give a background. I anticipate, people are still finding out about this. I'm going to have to do a little bit of background and history. I will present the 3 pick'em options. with that fourth, and then help the board and the planning commission discuss those. No decision will be taken that night. There will be no action by the board, but it's a good opportunity for them to visit together. This is such a monumental decision for our county. I think feedback from the planning commission to the board is important. And then we will also be taking public comments, which is great that the CAC is providing those. Anyone who would also like to provide comment, one thing I'm asking is for people to keep comments to 3 minutes, just so we can get through anyone that would like to share any comments or concerns they have that evening.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And then on the 27th is when the Board of County Commissioners are going to meet. Is
Yep.
that correct? And make a determination, make a decision that night. Is that correct?
So yeah, so Mark, that'll be at their 9 a.m. regular meeting
Okay.
because that's the last meeting before December 1st. So it'll be an agenda item. I anticipate that discussion going relatively quickly. It's the evening of the 14th that I think is the big night. That'll
Okay.
give them 2 weeks to think about what they want to do. And then at their regular business meeting at 9 a.m. on the 27th, they're going to tell me how I respond to the Pick'em email on what
Okay.
we're going to do.
Okay.
And I would say again for that meeting, those of you who have been to the Board of Commissioners meeting room, it is super small. So that might also be one if you want to tune in. Watching online might be the most comfortable just because I think it accommodates about 20 people.
Okay. Okay. I think I just wanted to get those
I'm
dates
glad you asked. Yeah.
out there for folks. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I don't see any other. Well, Nancy, do you have your hand raised, Nancy?
Just
Okay.
a real quick question. So, Sarah, it sounds like it'll be helpful for us to do probably an updated letter after what we've heard this morning, but for the meeting on the 14th. And then it sounds like after we hear the meeting on the 14th, it would be helpful to have some kind of a letter sent before the meeting on the 27th with further input, if you think that would be helpful. But there's really public comment is probably too late at that point in the meeting on the 27th, correct?
Yeah, there is a general standing opportunity for public comment at Board of County Commissioner meetings. You'd want to make arrangements by reaching out to the commissioner's office if you would like to provide comments that Wednesday morning. But but I think the 14th is good, or if you wanted to follow up comments, I will be on an airplane Tuesday for Thanksgiving. I will also be remoting into the board meeting on Wednesday morning. So if you send me the comments by Monday afternoon, I will make sure that they get to the board.
That's a 20, Sarah.
Yeah,
right?
yes.
Okay.
But again, please title them BiOp, FEMA, something in the subject line, because what I will do on Monday before I leave the office that night is search for those keywords to make sure I get as many comments as I can pulled and then emailed to the board so that they can review them before Wednesday's meeting.
Okay.
So yeah, just something in the subject line that I can quickly identify. So I get quite a few emails a day on all kinds of stuff. So want to make sure these don't get lost.
Okay. BiOp or Pick'em. Okay.
Or FEMA, just
Okay.
one of those
Okay. Got it.
keywords.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I think now we can turn our attention to a discussion about our letter. So thank you very much, Sarah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, let me see here. Can we put the letter up on the screen, maybe, Gary?
Yes, let me see if I can pull that up real quick.
Well, maybe while Gary's doing that, just real quick, Sarah, I see Tom Seep can you give us a sample letter that would be appropriate to send to legislators? I don't.
Yes, so I can do that. Also did send you and Nancy the EDC letter that
Yes.
I actually hand delivered to FEMA administration. So I'd say if you want to use this format or the EDC letter, you can highlight kind of the issues, but then really definitely make sure they're personalized. And I can also send you the email addresses I have for our state and congressional delegates who would
Oh.
like to hear from you. So Mark, I'll forward that to you so you have it.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, let's see. Some of the letters on the screen here.
You make it bigger, Gary?
You make it larger?
Let me see. Is that better?
A little bit.
That's better. That's getting a little better.
Do you want to have it read, Mark, or do you want to just give people the?
I'm happy to read this letter for folks if they'd like me to. This is a recommendation to Tillamook County regarding the FEMA PICM pre-implementation compliance measure. We support the concerns expressed in the letter of October 24, 2024 to FEMA Acting Assistant Administrator Jeffrey Jackson from the Economic Development Council of Tillamook County Board of Directors attached. In addition, we are very concerned about the sudden change of the due date for developing and implementing compliance plans that are connected to significant and severe impacts on quality of life in our community and on the ecosystem in which we live. Ecologies are highly complex systems. A hastily conceived solution to the problems we face are likely not to be in the best interests of either the ecosystem or the community. The Neskowin Citizen Advisory Committee has been working the past several months on the update of our community plan and have held a number of meetings to develop a vision and value statement as part of the plan. An important value is to protect our environment, including supporting the habitats of endangered or threatened fish and wildlife. An excerpt from the draft plan reads, living in rural Oregon, Neskowin is particularly sensitive to the ecosystem that we visit, work, and live in. As such, it is critical that Neskowin maintain sustainable practices that minimize our impact on Neskowin's natural environment. This environment includes beaches, creeks, forests, as well as other habitats. In order to continue to enjoy Neskowin, it is vital that we maintain practices that sustain our environment as well as adapt to it as it changes. We've urged the County Board of Commissioners and the Planning Commission to do everything possible to advocate with FEMA for a delay in the deadline mandates. The mandated timelines make it impossible to develop a quality plan that meets shared environmental goals as well as SB 406 housing goals and livability. We appreciate the difficult position that this mandate has placed on Tillamook County and stand ready to support your efforts as an advisory body. Please let us know how we can help. Signed, Mark Everett, Chairperson, Neskowin City Citizen Advisory Committee. So.
And then the attachment kind of goes through some of the more non-environmental issues that can affect us.
Right. Should I read that as well for folks or no? Okay.
I don't think so.
You might scroll down so people can read it.
Yeah.
It's basically based on economic and development issues.
Right. Yeah.
So in view of what Sarah said, it sounds like there may need to be some rewording to reflect that we're supporting the governor's letter expressing our disappointment that FEMA has responded no, and that we support the Oregon solutions recommendations and that kind of thing. That so some slight rewording. So I guess if it's appropriate, I move that the NCAC approve the NCAC sending a letter and having Mark represent us at the November 14th meeting of the Board of Commissioners and the Planning Commission, with edits as described, and give the board authority to approve that letter as edited.
Or as designee.
I'm sorry.
Right, or a designee,
Or a
yes, thank
designee.
you. Or a Mark or a designee, but the letter would be signed by Mark.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a very convoluted motion, but
I second.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion about that before we vote?
Joni has her
Okay.
hand up.
Okay, Joni, go ahead.
Excuse me, I just have a grammar and syntax correction to make.
Okay.
If you could put the form back up there on the first page is all. I can't see it now.
Yeah, hang on a second. I have to.
Sorry, I don't think we should send something that's, where is, oh, it's in a solution. Here it is, a hastily conceived solution to the problems we face is likely not to be the best interest. Either keep it singular or change the subject to hastily conceived solutions.
Good point, Joni. Thank you.
Good.
That's all I wanted to state.
Thank you. And I guess I'm going to read a comment from Wyatt before we take a vote, because he's got a comment here. He says, it's clear that FEMA is scared of the wrath of the court. We should also add that we support legal recourse efforts by counties. So that's maybe something to throw in the mix in terms of, a conversation here before we vote. I don't know.
Are there any objections to Wyatt's comment?
I don't see any.
You might have Sarah help you with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you still there, Sarah?
Since they followed amicus brief.
Yes, I am. And I would be happy to send you some wording for that. You bet.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And of course, we would run the letter by you, the final version too, before we send it off.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I will. In fact, I will start working on that this afternoon for you. So I can get that to you ASAP.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments in the letter, Sarah?
No, I appreciate Wyatt's suggestion and Joni's correction, and just want to thank you all again for supporting the commissioners in the county. This is a big deal. So thank you for your time today and for being so thoughtful about this.
Thanks
Thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think there's been a motion. It's been seconded. We've had some discussion. Any other conversation? If not, we'll go ahead and do the vote.
And I guess to with as amended by Wyatt. So.
Yes, right, as amended. Okay, Gary, I don't know. Okay, here it is. I wrote up, I guess we've got two, and so actually we haven't talked about the second part to this. And maybe, well, we need to do one at a time. So I guess wouldn't it be correct that we would just be voting on the first?
That's correct.
Okay, we'll just vote on number one right now only, which is to approve the proposed November 14th NCAC community letter. And really as amended is what it should they say addressing FEMA pick'em options to be presented at the joint BOCC and Planning Commission meeting on that date. So,
I should note that you can't unvote. I had already voted for both, so there will be some.
okay. Okay, quick vote. Okay. All right, so we're voting for number one right now, folks, and if you can just cast your vote for number one, either yes or no.
And let me just say that the motion is, as said, a little different to authorize the board to make the
Yeah, right.
adjustments too. So,
Right.
okay, thank you.
I wrote this up. I didn't know exactly how it would be. We haven't
Mhm.
wrote it up ahead of time, so.
We're still getting a few more in. We're up at 36 respondents, 37. So give it a few more.
So Gary, do we hit submit and will we be able to vote for number two in a minute? Or
I'll have to redo it and resubmit a new poll.
okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
And we've got 39, 50. Doesn't look like there's any more coming in. Do you want to just go ahead and see the results?
Sure. Okay. It's 100% on the first one. So, okay. That's a yes. So,
Okay.
thank you.
We can redo the second poll here.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. So while Gary's redoing that, the second question for today was to ask the NCAC membership to, I guess, to approve the executive board taking action on behalf of the NCAC community related to the FEMA pick'em options for submission of an NCAC community letter to the November 27th Board of County Commissioners meeting. So it is a
It looks like it's closed. And people already voted, so I thought we were.
I think I think maybe one or two voted, but Gary's going to put it up, I think, again, and we would vote on number two.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. But so I guess that's I'll make the motion.
I second.
Okay.
I've got one other question for Sarah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Sarah, you're actually going to get to have Thanksgiving?
Yes, I'm going to go see family. So I'm
Okay.
super stoked about that. And I hope that you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving too.
Good.
Okay, Mark, we're ready for the second.
Okay,
poll.
so for number two, it was moved and seconded. Is there any conversation discussion before we take a vote on this? I know it's up on the screen already. I guess folks are already voting maybe, but
It's not up yet.
it's okay.
Uh,
I think.
It's
let's
good
see.
to just check for
It's
discussion
not.
first.
All right. It's
so.
not. Okay.
Soon, you're not seeing it?
No,
I don't. Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, I don't know what's the
I
problem
don't know
here.
that we need it though. I'm not hearing any objections. I'm
Yeah.
guessing
Yeah.
you could just do a voice vote.
Okay.
I don't know why it's not launching. It says it's been launched, and I don't know why people aren't seeing it.
Well, that's okay.
Well,
Should we?
it was launched as a dual set of questions, so whoever voted on it when they voted on the first one, and then the item down below didn't say submit because it said close because people already voted.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just do a voice vote. Would that just be all those raise your hand or what's the best?
can't see the hands, Mark, because a lot of
Okay.
people.
Raise your virtual hand.
Yeah,
All
you
in
do the
favor?
Just a voice vote?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You have
All
to
in
un-
favor?
You have to.
Aye.
Yes,
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Some might be voting more than once, but that's,
We're
Aye,
stuffing the
aye.
ballot box.
okay.
I
All right.
think the more important one is going to
Yeah.
be the nays, and if you
Yeah,
have,
the
if
nays.
you are voting nay, you should unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
don't see.
Go
any-
ahead,
Hear any
Mark,
nays.
you haven't called for the nays yet.
I'm not, are there any nays? Okay, I don't hear any.
You're in the clear.
Okay. All right, so thank you very much, everybody. So just to recap, we're
The
gonna
motion carried.
the motion carried.
Yeah, thank you.
Both carried, and so both have passed. And so we're gonna go ahead and reword some parts of the letter that we saw today. And then what I believe will happen is after the 14th, we will draft another letter to be presented on November 25th to Sarah, and she will forward it for the 27th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. So there will be 2 letters from the NCAC. So, and with that, I think we're done for today.
Great
Just a lot
turnout
of-
today.
A really good turnout and tons of great questions. And Sarah, in my opinion, was just amazing about answering all of the questions and being here.
Quick
So,
question.
yes,
Who
Yeah.
will decide which of the 3 options apply to Neskowin?
the Board of County Commissioners, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We had a membership participation of 63 today. That's a wonderful number.
It is.
Good
Yes.
representation. Sarah, a yo person's effort. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And thank you all again.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks, Mark.
Yeah.